All right, today we are breaking down a system that literally redrew the world map, modern imperialism. What was the actual plan? How did it work on the ground? We're going to dig into the blueprint that built empires.
So, just to make sure we're all starting from the same place, what are we really talking about when we say imperialism? Well, you can think of it as a four-part process. It all starts with acquiring land. Then it's about extracting all the valuable resources from that land, spreading Western values to the people who live there, and finally, establishing total political control. That's the core idea we're exploring.
Okay, so knowing the definition is one thing, but how did European powers actually pull this off? How did they take this concept and turn it into a reality across massive continents? What was the actual blueprint they were following? And blueprint really is the perfect word for it. Because this wasn't just random. It was a very methodical plan, right? It had specific, interconnected parts, and they were all designed to get to one particular outcome. So let's lay out the schematics. Here it is, that foundational plan. And you can see how these four pieces build on top of each other. I mean, you can't get the resources without the land, right? And it's a whole lot easier to maintain control if you've already influenced the local culture and values. This wasn't just a to-do list. It was a strategy, a sequence, kind of like a machine with four essential gears that all had to turn together. So, step one, you need the territory. This period was just a mad dash, a huge competition between European nations to stake their claim on massive parts of Africa and Asia. It really was a race for land, which was seen as the #1 measure of a country's power and prestige. But what was all this land for? That's the key question. And the answer mainly was to fuel the engine of the Industrial Revolution back home. These colonies became the go-to source for things like rubber, cotton, diamonds, all the raw materials that factories in Europe were hungry for. Now, control wasn't just about armies or money. There was a huge cultural piece to this puzzle, too. The blueprint actually included spreading Western values and traditions. The idea was that if you could encourage people to assimilate, well, they'd be a lot easier to govern. And that brings us to the endgame, locking down power. All of those other steps were leading right here, to the establishment of direct political authority. The goal was to run the colony, to make its laws, and to make absolutely sure it served the interests of the empire. That's what completed the blueprint. Okay, so you've got the blueprint, but how do you actually manage a colony day to day, especially while you're thousands of miles away? This led to two main strategies for how to best maintain that political control on the ground. And these were the two main management styles. On one side, you have direct control, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You send your own officials, your own people, to run the whole show. But on the other side, you have a more subtle approach, indirect control. This meant working with the existing local leaders and power structures, essentially getting them to govern the population for you. So why would you choose indirect control? Well, the thinking was pretty strategic. By using local leaders and systems that people were already familiar with, you'd hopefully face less resistance. It was seen as a smarter way to keep the peace and avoid expensive, bloody rebellions. Now, out of all the parts of this blueprint, there was one that was more important than all the others. It was the engine driving the entire machine, that relentless demand for raw materials. This wasn't just a nice side benefit. For a lot of people, it was the whole point. If you want a perfect example of just how systematic this all was, look no further than the Berlin Conference. In 1884, European leaders got together not to, learn about Africa, but to literally set the rules for how they were going to carve it up among themselves. And this quote right here, it just cuts to the absolute heart of it. Can you imagine drawing new borders across an entire continent, deciding the fate of millions of people without asking a single person who actually lived there? It was the ultimate top-down exercise of power. And the results of those decisions were, frankly, devastating. Whole landscapes were transformed, stripped for their resources, but the real cost was human. This led to the brutal exploitation of people, where forced labor was the tool used to extract that wealth. In places like the Congo Free State, millions suffered and died harvesting rubber under a truly horrific regime. This wasn't just an economic plan. It came at a staggering human price. So let's put all these pieces back together. You've got the blueprint, the different methods of control, the motivation behind it all, and what you get is a really clear, almost mechanical view of how this entire system of modern imperialism actually worked. So, to sum it all up, the system kicks off with acquiring land.
Then, that land is used as a source for raw materials to fuel industry. To keep things running smoothly, Western values are introduced to encourage people to assimilate, and the whole thing is held together by political control, either directly or indirectly. That's the machine of imperialism in a nutshell. So we've looked at the mechanics of the system, but the story, of course, doesn't just end there. So the question that I want to leave you with is this. How do the lines drawn and the systems built from this 19th century blueprint continue to shape the borders, the economies, and even the conflicts of our world today?